Welcome to Love Lies Chronicles.
I'd really appreciate your comment. It helps me understand if you enjoyed the story and how I can improve in future ones. I'm Grant Keller, 38, a project manager for a civil engineering firm in Denver. This started long before any dramatic moment. It started with small refusals that felt harmless on their own. For months, every time I suggested something, Tuesday tacos at the spot we liked, a Saturday hike up Matthews/Winters, even just a quiet movie night, she found a reason to say no. Late meeting. Too tired. The girls already planned something. It felt like being quietly moved to the waiting room of my own life. At first, I wrote it off as a seasonal thing. We'd had a heavy quarter at work, and her office was rolling out new software that had everyone on edge. When she'd wave off plans and slide past me toward the bedroom, I'd tell myself she'd make up for it next week. But next week looked exactly like the last one. I would put something on the calendar. She would forget we'd talked. The plan would evaporate. When you love someone, you get good at forgiving small things. I was getting too good. The house didn't change all at once. It shifted by degrees. Her shoes started landing by the door in pairs I didn't recognize. New perfume, clean, sharp, not the warm one I knew, hung in the hallway after she floated past. Takeout containers showed up in the recycling from places we never ordered from. She'd smile when she noticed me notice, but the smile had a lid on it, like a candle snuffed and still smoking. I told myself I was overeating. I also started rinsing the takeout labels off before I tossed them, so I could stop staring at them. Her phone, once face up and careless on the counter, learned to lie flat and screen down, always on silent. The passcode changed. Then the notifications themselves changed. No names on the banners, just message. If I walked into the room, she'd swipe away whatever was glowing there and ask me about my day like nothing had happened. I answered, kept my voice even, and watched the way her eyes slid for a second to the edge of the table where the phone rested, like gravity was stronger over there. She started dressing up for errands in outfits I used to see on date nights. Then the errands stretched. Gas and grocery trips came back 2 hours later with nothing but a coffee cup and a vague story about a friend she ran into. I'd nod. She'd kiss my cheek and drift past the questions I wasn't asking. There's a point where asking feels less like seeking truth and more like asking for permission to be respected. Work kept me grounded. I like plans that become bridges, checklists that become finished spans of concrete and steel. In the field trailer, I was precise. At home, the plans were jelly. I'd put pasta water on. She'd text that she was running behind. I'd hold the boil too long. The water would turn to steam. I'd eat late alone. A few times I made enough for two and wrapped the second plate in foil, labeling it with a Sharpie like we were roommates. She'd smile the next day and say thanks, then call it sweet, in that tone that makes the word a pat on the head. The tells weren't loud, but they were consistent. She started narrating her schedule without specifics, like a weather report that never mentions temperature. I've got something after work. We might do drinks. It could be late. She asked fewer questions of me and filled silences with scrolling. The way she laughed changed. Less belly, more breath. The laughter lived in her group chats, inside jokes that never crossed our table. I began to feel like a guest star on a show I used to headline. Sleep changed too. She started showering at odd hours, then claiming she was too wired to sleep. Sometimes she took the couch, calling it not personal. That was the phrase she liked. Not personal, babe. She'd disappear under a blanket with her screen reflecting in her eyes while I lay upstairs, listening to the house settle and the garage creak when the wind got in. I stopped waiting for her to come up. I added another pillow and learned to like the empty space. None of it was enough to accuse. All of it was enough to adjust. I stopped suggesting last-minute plans she could brush aside and started making quiet plans that didn't need her. Mornings got mine again. Lift, shower, eggs, coffee. I took the long route to the office along the Platte and let the river pull the static out of my head. I started keeping better records of bills, of passwords, of the small practical things a life can hinge on, because practicality steadies a man when sentiment tries to knock him over. A couple of times I did what husbands do and tried to open the subject. I'd pick a neutral moment, late Sunday, sleepy sunlight on the couch, and say, "We good?" She'd go still and stare at some point above my shoulder and say, "I'm just stretched thin." That was the phrase that replaced yes. Stretched thin. I would say okay, then offer to take something off her plate. She always said she had it. I noticed what vanished. The little habits that made us us. Her stealing bacon off my plate, her toe nudging my ankle under the table, her humming while she folded towels, gone. The house sounded different without those small noises. She kept buying flowers and letting them die uncut in a vase, a kind of aesthetic tree-off that said more than she meant it to. I trimmed the stems a couple of times. After that, I stopped rearranging reminders that didn't belong to me. For a while, I blamed the city. Denver summers run people thin. Too many patio invitations, too many rooftop photos, too many reasons to be anywhere but home. But then I watched her be present for everyone else. Texts flew with cousins. Workout selfies went to friends. She remembered other people's birthdays. She remembered to bring a coworker a latte because she had a tough week. She remembered everything except us. The absence was in the space where we used to meet. I didn't go through bags or scroll when she showered or set traps to see what shook loose. That's not who I am. I've seen men lose themselves trying to hold on, and it never looks like strength. Instead, I watched the pattern the way I'd watch a crack in a slab. Measure, mark, return to it later. Each week, the line spread a millimeter, and each week, I updated my mental blueprint. If the structure was going to fail, I wanted to be standing clear when it did. What kept me steady was the ordinary. Field reports. Coffee that tasted the same every single morning. The feel of rebar plans in my hands. I went to the gym when I said I would and texted less. I stopped being the first to send funny links and stopped rephrasing invitations she'd already declined. It was alignment. If she wanted distance, I could meet her there without raising my voice. There were nights she came home early and dropped onto the couch with her head on my shoulder like muscle memory, and I thought maybe the tide was turning. But even then, her phone would vibrate and the moment would lift up like a paper corner, and she'd slide away to answer. She'd come back, sure, but lighter, like she'd handed the best part of her attention to someone else and didn't have a spare for me. You can't compete with a ghost, you just end the contest. Nothing explosive happened to convince me. No lipstick on a collar. Just repetitions, plans declined, explanations that didn't explain a life lived adjacent to mine. A man can live next to denial for a long time if he confuses restraint with virtue. I kept my restraint. I also stopped confusing it for blindness. By the time I finally admitted to myself that something was wrong, it was a ledger that had balanced the same way for months. So I stayed calm. I kept the house in order, the accounts clean, the truck gassed up. I sharpened my questions into silence and let the patterns speak in full sentences. I breathed, counted the days, and let the story tell itself. When truth arrived, it wasn't going to need my help. All I had to do was be ready to hear it. We'd turned on fine by years ago after a snowstorm put her on a shoulder off I-70, and I needed to bring a tow strap and coffee. After that scare, the little map tile lived in the background like a smoke detector. Good to have, rarely noticed. I hadn't opened it in months. The night I did, the dot wasn't anywhere near the gastropub she said she'd try with coworkers. It sat motionless on a quiet block in Capitol Hill, a street I knew from the way certain names never quite leave a man's head. Her ex lived there back when we were still dating, and apparently the address had kept its grip. The dot didn't drift. It nested. 10 minutes. 20. An hour. I set the phone face down and went back to dishes like I hadn't seen anything. I prefer evidence to adrenaline. The next week, same choreography. Stopping for a drink. The dot found the same grid square and settled like it had been invited. I tested my own memory against coincidence. Maybe a friend had moved. Maybe a new Pilates studio opened on that side street. The map wasn't wrong, though. It had that smug GPS confidence, the blue ping that says you're here and nowhere else. I put the phone away again because I needed my actions to stay cooler than my pulse. There's a difference between catching and confirming. The former satisfies pride. The latter changes a life. Her habits helped me separate the two. The phone stayed face down at home, but it came alive in parking lots. I could see its glow in reflections when she sat in the car to finish a podcast before coming inside. I started taking inventory like a foreman walking a site at dusk. Documents, keys, passwords, bills. I scanned what mattered and uploaded it somewhere she couldn't reach, labeled cleanly, dated. I moved the irreplaceables, my dad's watch, a binder of tax records, the title to the truck, out of shared drawers and into a small safe I'd kept for storms and bad luck. If this was a storm, I wanted tarps in place before the rain. She gave me the gift of certainty without realizing it. A Friday bled into Saturday, and she posted a party shot to her story, 3 seconds of champagne, a skyline, and, in the near background, a profile I recognized with that instant ache your body remembers before your mind does. She deleted it fast. Good reflexes, wrong opponent, but by then my thumb had already landed and held. Screenshot. Saved to a folder with the date, time, and the little Capitol Hill geotag she forgot to scrub. I filed it like I file inspection photos and went on with my evening. Dinner for one, the kind you make when the point is to prove you're fine alone. The next morning, I asked if she wanted pancakes. She said she had a thing. The thing lasted until dusk, then slid into we might grab drinks. The map put her back on that street by 11. I started setting reminders, renewals, insurance notices, the sort of small deadlines that become leverage when someone decides chaos is a lifestyle. I made lists you could hand a stranger and trust they'd understand the house without me. It was the same discipline that gets concrete trucks there when they're supposed to be there. When our anniversary night finally came, I chose a restaurant we'd loved before life started speaking to her through other speakers. I left the reservation under her name, partly out of habit, partly because I wanted the call to go to her when they asked if we were still coming. She texted at 6 that she was running a little behind. At 7, no update. At 8, I paid for a meal I didn't eat, tipped well, and told the hostess to give our table to someone hungry. Back home, the house had that stale quiet it gets when a plan dies inside it. I put the gift I'd bought, nothing dramatic, just a small piece of something from the first year we lived together, on the top shelf of my closet. Around midnight, I opened Find By because I wanted this chapter to end with facts. The dot blinked into the same square, concrete as a property line. I turned off the lamp and let the screen light the room a thin blue. Any urge to send a message slid past me. I'd said my last persuasive thing weeks ago and didn't recognize the man who said it. What mattered now was my readiness. So while the dot stayed still, I checked the copies of the documents I'd uploaded, confirmed the backups, and wrote a short list of next steps in a notes app: boxes, locks, keys, accounts. By 2, the map hadn't changed, but she posted a boomerang of a glass clinking and then immediately removed it. I didn't bother this time. The evidence I had could stand up without props. There's nothing to argue with in a timestamp. At 3, the dot drifted toward a rideshare corridor and then paused like whoever was inside couldn't decide whether to go home or go somewhere less honest. I put the phone down face up and let the screen time out. I've learned that sometimes the strongest move is to do nothing obvious. At 4:07 a.m., the screen woke on its own. A text barreled in, punctuation drunk and mean. Wow, big man tracking me at 4 a.m. It read like someone who wants to be the victim in a story they're writing in real time. Years ago, I might have answered with everything I'd swallowed: names, dates, screenshots, coordinates. Instead, I let it sit there and glow. If she could guess what I knew from the way her own conscience worked, that was between her and her battery percentage. What I owed myself was follow-through. I added label boxes under it and call storage under that. I simply set the phone down like a tool I was done with for the night and listened to the first trains running up the Platte as the sky started to unblacken. The house felt different, not lighter yet, but aligned, as if a beam had finally acknowledged a crack and decided to stop pretending. By dawn, she'd stopped sending anything. The map put her near downtown, then off, either by battery or by choice. I poured coffee and stood at the window while the neighborhood woke. Sprinklers ticked, a dog dragged a man down the sidewalk, and a runner in a neon shirt cut the corner wide to avoid a puddle. Regular life making its regular sounds, like a reminder that not every shift inside a house has to announce itself to the block. My mug felt steady in my hand. The list on my phone looked short and doable. I needed to keep my word to myself. I snapped the notebook shut, put the phone in my pocket, and started the truck to let the engine warm. I'd make my calls, do my errands, and say nothing until saying something became logistics. She wanted to bait me into a role: angry, jealous, unhinged, because that role would make her story make sense to the people who didn't have my map and my screenshot. I had the only facts I needed. And facts, handled quietly, have a way of moving furniture no argument ever can. Boxes. I pulled the flat pack from the garage, cut them open on the tailgate, and built 6 mediums, the kind that make you choose what matters. I laid them in the hall like a neat boundary line, then walked room to room with a calm I felt down in my legs. I packed only what a person needs to land somewhere without humiliation: jeans, sweaters, the black blazer she likes for work, her shoe rack's first row, a week of underwear and socks, the bathroom drawer with her daily stuff, her meds, the charger that's always draped off her nightstand. I zipped her makeup bag and wrapped the perfume she switched to in 2 dish towels so it wouldn't shatter. I left the party dresses, the framed photos, the souvenirs, things you take when you're ready to take a life with you. This was space, delivered exactly the way she'd been asking for it, without saying the words. While I packed, I took pictures of each open drawer before I moved anything, then a picture of each box closed and labeled. If she wanted an inventory, she'd have one. The markers squeaked across the cardboard: clothes, bedroom, shoes, hall, toiletries, bathroom. I carried the boxes to the front door and lined them like a polite procession. The sun had lifted over the neighbor's roof. The house felt brighter than it had in weeks. Accounts. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and did the unromantic work that keeps a man upright when the emotional part of the house falls in. I logged into the bank and removed her as an authorized user from the card tied to my income. Notifications pinged, change confirmed, without ceremony. I changed passwords on streaming, cloud storage, the Wi-Fi, and the smart lock app. I locked me out of being responsible for whatever came next. That difference mattered to me. It kept my jaw from clenching. Evidence. Discipline over pride. I exported the find by location history for the past 6 weeks and saved the file with a plain name, then dropped in the screenshot she'd posted and deleted. I wrote simple captions under each: dates, times, and addresses. No adjectives. No gotchas. Just the kind of documentation I respect on job sites when you need to show exactly what cracked and when. I uploaded the folder to a clean drive and printed a hard copy, because printers and lawyers speak the same language: paper. I didn't read it twice. I already knew every line by heart. Attorney. I called the firm a co-worker used during his separation. The receptionist recognized the urgency without me saying the word. She put me on with a partner who listened while I laid out facts like a project scope. We'd been married 7 years, no kids, house in both names, most accounts separate, and here is my documentation of a pattern. He asked 2 or 3 questions a man asks when he's measuring a beam and thanked me for the clarity. We can move to protect your assets and outline separation parameters today, he said. I said yes. He asked me to email him the folder. I did, then signed the engagement letter he sent 15 minutes later. It felt like pulling a permit: dry, necessary, freeing. Delivery. Her mom lives 20 minutes south in a tidy ranch with a red door you can spot from half a block. I texted first: I have some of her things to drop. You home? And got a reply within a minute: yes. Bring them. No questions. I loaded the boxes into the truck, added a duffel with her gym gear, and set off. The morning had warmed. The radio stayed off. When I pulled to the curb, her mom was already at the door. She looked at the boxes, then at me, and the expression on her face wasn't surprise. It was a tired understanding I didn't want to interrogate. I packed essentials, I said, voice steady. There's a note inside the top box. Keys and mail are in the side pocket. Thank you for not throwing it in the yard, she said softly. Then she squeezed my forearm the way mothers do when they see a son standing where a storm used to be. I carried the boxes to the entry and stacked them neatly against the wall. Note: the letter at the top was 1 page, handwritten, dated. You said you needed space. I'm honoring that. Your essentials are with your mother. The house is rekeyed. Your mail and personal items are safe. For logistics, use email. I'll keep it practical. I wish you well. There was no line about the screenshot. She knows what she did. I know what I saw. Back home, I finished the symbolic housekeeping. I stripped our bed and made it with clean sheets that smelled like nothing. I moved her nightstand items into a labeled bin and slid it into the hall closet. I collected her plants and grouped them by the window so they wouldn't suffer from my decision. I opened the windows. The house breathed. Public exposure prep. I drafted a single message to the people who would inevitably be asked to pick sides: her parents, her siblings, the small circle of mutual friends who know how to read a calendar. The message was a header with an attachment. For context, inside the PDF, the timeline, the 3 screenshots, 2 maps, and the accidental post. dates and addresses stamped like a survey. I saved the draft and left it unsent. There's a time to swing a hammer. There's a time to place it in plain sight and let gravity make your point. I'd wait until spin required ballast. By noon, I'd done the work a man does when he mirrors someone else's logic. She wanted independence without conversation. I gave it to her, complete and quiet. I ate a late lunch standing at the counter, looked around at a house that felt strangely ordered, and noticed for the first time in months that the silence didn't scratch. It rested. My phone, face up, lit with small, ordinary notifications, shipment delivered, appointment confirmed. Not a single message from her. I took the last step on my list and put my wedding band in the top drawer of my desk. If she returned for discussion, I had logistics ready. If she returned for performance, I had nothing for her. The map, the screenshot, the locks, the lawyer, none of it was vengeance dressed up as order. It was just order. And order, when you've been living in someone else's chaos, feels like dignity you can fold and put away. The afternoon slid past in quiet tasks. Laundry, a run along the river, 2 calls returned from the attorney's office setting the next week's steps. I'd already confirmed what mattered. The rest would arrive when it arrived. If she knocked, we would talk through the chain. If she texted, I would answer with dates and times. If she tried to turn our story into a rumor, I had a file named context. PDF that could stand for itself. By evening, the list was done, and the house looked like a plan finished to spec. I made dinner for one and ate at the table without checking a door, a driveway, or a screen. Space given. Space kept. When a man stops arguing with weather and starts building around it, he doesn't feel triumphant. He feels still. That was enough. She didn't text all morning. Silence can mean thought or strategy. With her, it usually meant the latter. At 12:13 p.m., the door camera chimed and filled my phone with a still image of sunglasses, crossed arms, and the stance she used when she wanted a scene. She tugged on the handle twice like the lock might forget itself if she insisted. When it didn't, she knocked in a rhythm that used to make me open fast. I let the beats finish. Then I set the chain, opened the door the width of my palm, and kept my voice low. I told her where her boxes were, what address, and that I'd left a note with details. She went straight to volume. Why would I do this? Who did I think I was? Who changes locks on his wife? I didn't match it. Email for logistics, I said. I'll keep replies practical. The door closed without drama. I stood there a minute, hand flat on the wood, to make sure I wasn't shaking. She tried the back door, then the garage keypad, then her phone. The messages came in a rush. Anger, then pity scripts, then the kind of flirtation she deploys when she wants a reset without admitting there was a problem to reset. I answered once with a single line that would read the same in a courtroom as it did on a screen. Please use email, counsel copied. I added my attorney's address and put the phone face down again. When a fire starts in a pile of oily rags, the smartest act is to separate fuel from heat. The social version of events arrived next. A story post with a white text on black background. Imagine being locked out of your own home by the man who loves you. It didn't mention why, of course. She left comments open, which was either bravado or ignorance. A mutual pinged me, what's going on? Then another. I sent the PDF I'd prepared. Dates, find by pins, the 3-minute champagne post she deleted, the straightforward timeline. My subject line was, for clarity. If a man's going to speak, let the facts do it. Then I sent one more message, the one I'd promised myself I'd reserve for when spin turned into smear. A single email to her family chat. Parents, siblings, the aunt who always plays peacemaker. The body was 3 sentences. I've rekeyed the house. Her essentials are at her mother's. For context, see attached. I attached the same PDF and hit send. The read receipts stacked in less than a minute. Her sister typed a response and erased it 3 times, then wrote, I'll check on her. Her father sent a single sentence, I'll call her now. Her mother, who already knew where the boxes were, replied, she's here. I've got it. None of them asked me to explain more. None of them argued with the timestamps. That was enough revenge for me. Truth in a room that usually runs on feelings. By mid-afternoon, she switched tactics. You didn't have to embarrass me. Popped onto the screen. We could have kept this private. Private had been months of me being moved to the margins while she wrote a separate life off camera. Privacy ended when she made an audience out of her choices. I didn't send that. I replied with a neutral line that covered the point without feeding the fire. I corrected public misinformation with documented facts. She sent a paragraph about control and punishment. I closed the thread without reading it twice. Boundaries are measured by what you don't consume. The ripples started showing. A mutual friend texted, "She told us you went crazy last night." Then we saw the screenshots. "We're out." Another wrote, "I didn't want to believe it. Now I do. Take care of yourself." I didn't thank anyone or accept anyone's sympathy. I just replied, "Understood." People line up quickly when the wind shifts. What mattered was that I hadn't said a single colorful word about her, not to them and not online. The file spoke, and it didn't raise its voice. Around 5, I watched the door camera show her mother's red door open on my boxes. She was there, hair tied up, yesterday's eyeliner softened into a smudge. She picked up the top box, set it down, opened it, took out the note, and read. The camera doesn't record audio, but you don't need sound to recognize a person losing the script they plan to use. She looked at her mother. Her mother didn't hug her first. She pointed at the stack like a foreman pointing to where the work starts. You can love someone and still refuse to applaud their chaos. I respected that in the older woman more than I can explain. There was a time I would have driven down, tried to soothe, tried to absorb her panic so it didn't spill into other rooms. That time is gone. I went to the gym, lifted like a man who wanted his hands to learn the new weight of his life, and came home to an email from my attorney with next steps. Asset protections filed. Temporary separation, terms drafted. A proposed schedule for retrieving any remaining personal items with a third party present. He asked if I wanted to include a stipulation about posting the other party on social media. I wrote back yes and signed where he indicated. Paper is dry, but it holds. When I got back from a short run, she'd posted again, more vague quotes, less detail. The comments under them were different now. Cautious, a few quietly corrective, one or two from people who had seen the PDF and wrote, "Take accountability," like a life hack. She ended up turning comments off. That's what truth does. It doesn't destroy people. It cancels the lies they budgeted with. She texted me one more time. "You made me look insane." I hadn't made her look like anything. I'd removed the filter. That night she tried tenderness by memory. A photo of a place we went our first year. No caption, then a private message about, "Remember when?" I looked at it for a full 30 seconds, because 10 years ago I promised myself I'd never disrespect my own history to win an argument. I remembered when. I also remembered last night's map, and the week before, and the months before that. I archived the message and put my phone in the kitchen drawer like a tool I didn't need until morning. Unreachable isn't punishment. It's clarity. Somewhere in there, the ex did what men like him do when the light hits them, disappeared. I know because the little circle around his name vanished from a few mutual follow lists, and the likes under her old photos lost one constant. Maybe he blocked. Maybe he got blocked. Maybe he didn't want to be included in a family thread with timestamps. Before bed, I sent one last email to her, copied to counsel, laying out what tomorrow looked like. A window for her to collect anything I'd missed with a third party present, the temporary financial boundaries, the request that communication remain written. 3 sentences, 2 dates, 1 bullet list. I slept without dreams for the first time in months and woke to a neighborhood that sounded like itself. Sprinklers, a truck backing up, the early bus. The next day brought small confirmations I didn't know I wanted. The neighbor who'd watched enough through blinds to form an opinion waved and asked about the rekey. I said it went fine. A cousin of hers, the one who sent wedding photos every anniversary without fail, messaged me privately. "I'm sorry. I love you both, but I saw the file. If you need anything practical, tell me." I wrote back, "Thanks. I'm okay." Because I finally understood that what I needed wasn't going to be delivered by anyone else's energy. By evening, the temperature dropped and the house sat where it always sat, but I noticed the difference. No waiting. The consequences weren't flames, they were absence. She pressured, pleaded. I stayed where I'd drawn the line and let the truth do the heavy lift. And somewhere between her last text and the first star over the block, other people stopped asking me for my side of the story because they already had it, in a handful of timestamps and a single screenshot that didn't blink. The morning after I sent the logistics email, I woke up before my alarm and realized I wasn't listening for anything. The quiet wasn't empty, it had borders. I brewed coffee and drank it by the window and let the day start without needing to brace. It's strange how simple life feels when you stop arguing with what it is. The attorney moved quickly. Temporary terms became signed orders. Scheduled pickup window with a third party present, no late-night visits, written communication only, a social media clause that penalized either of us for posting the other. We arranged a single afternoon for the last items I might have missed. She arrived with a friend and a box of trash bags, saw the labeled bins in the hallway, and put the bags back in the trunk. I stayed in the kitchen with the third party, answered 2 questions about where something had been stored, and kept my hands in my pockets. When she left, she lingered at the door like she was waiting for a cue. I had none to give. A door can be a boundary without being a slammed one. There were apologies later, of a kind. Long paragraphs that sounded like weather reports. Overwhelmed, confused, not herself, as if the map pins and the screenshot had been acts of climate, not choices. Each time I replied the same way. Received, noted, please route future communication through counsel. She tried memory as a lever and nostalgia as a currency. I let both sit where they landed. The past deserves respect, but it doesn't get to invoice the future. What took me by surprise was capacity. My days expanded inside familiar routines that felt new only because they were uncontested. I reclaimed the evenings that had once been spent hedging. I lifted on schedule, cooked simple food, ran the river path without checking my phone at the turnaround. I stacked lumber in the garage and built a workbench because I missed the feeling of making a thing that stays made. I fixed the sticky window in the guest room because I'd said I would last spring and let it slide when attention was a fight. The house began to mirror the way I wanted to live. Practical, spare, nothing hidden to keep anything seeming whole. People showed up and then quieted down. The first week, texts from mutuals landed like balloons and then drifted away once they realized I wasn't hosting a spectacle. Her father called to say he'd seen the file and would keep his side of the conversation on the ground. Her sister asked what bills had her name on them and paid her portion the same day. I noticed the way facts simplify family, how the absence of narrative turns accusation into admin. Little bit of revenge lives there, I'll admit. Watching a circle that ran on feelings shift to spreadsheets because the story can't outrun a timeline. Work helped. Bridges don't care who texted you at midnight. They want measurements and rebar and the correct pour at the right temperature. My crew knew something had changed only because I stopped leaving early to manage chaos. I took on a field inspection I'd been avoiding, reviewed submittals without letting my mind wander, and hit deadlines like they were rescue boats. Satisfaction came back in the precise way a level bubble centers. When you give a man a task he can finish, he remembers who he is faster than you think. She tried one last time to reroute the ending. A proposal to talk in person, just the 2 of us, no lawyers, to see if anything was salvageable. I looked at the ring in my desk drawer and pictured the hallway lined with boxes and her mother's red door opening without surprise. Salvage belongs to shipwrecks. My life was not a wreck. It was a structure that needed a new load path. I replied with 2 sentences about the process we'd already set and signed my name beneath them like a stamp on a planned set. Respect isn't a negotiation, it's a spec. Either you build to it or you don't. The divorce filings went in on a Tuesday. I signed in blue ink and slid the folder back across a table without fanfare. There's a kind of grief in paperwork that doesn't cry. It just finalizes. I drove home the long way and let the city pass. Parks full of kids, a food truck where we used to stand too close. 3 cranes lifting a skyline no one person owns. I got home, opened the windows, and repainted the bedroom the color I'd wanted last year before the fight about whether it felt too plain. The room dried into a quiet I could sleep inside. Sometimes the most radical thing a man can do is choose a neutral shade and mean it. Eventually the social part faded. She stopped posting, people stopped asking. The PDF retired to a directory I no longer opened. The ex remained a rumor without a face, which is where he belonged. A friend tried to sell me the story that closure requires a final conversation where everyone confesses the exact shape of their harm. I don't buy that. Closure happened for me when I realized I didn't have to carry both halves of a promise just to prove I was strong enough. I kept a few reminders where I could see them. The workbench, the clean calendar, the ring, still in the drawer, because I don't need to destroy artifacts to prove to myself I'm finished with a chapter. What I removed were the negotiations that make a man smaller. The habit of asking permission to feel what he feels, the reflex to accept confusion when clarity costs less, the performance of patience in a room where patience was treated like weakness. It's not that I won. It's that I stopped losing myself one accommodation at a time. She moved out of her mother's a month later, according to a cousin who still sends me photos of his kids on Halloween. I wished her well without sending the words. The attorney finalized the rest. Titles updated. Accounts separated. No ongoing obligations beyond the ones spelled out in clean language. A life reduced to lines and signatures isn't romantic, but it's honest. Honesty is the only ground that holds. On the first Sunday after everything was stamped and filed, I drove into the foothills alone and hiked the trail we used to save for anniversaries. Just lungs, legs, sky. At the overlook, I sat on the same rock and thought about concrete, how it cures under pressure and time, how it needs stillness to set right. I considered the man I'd been at the beginning, polite, hopeful, willing, and how those traits aren't weaknesses until you give them to someone who treats them like spare change. The wind came up and then settled. I stayed until the light went soft and the edges on the front range blurred. Back home, I cooked, ate, and cleaned the kitchen without checking a door. I took the ring out of the drawer and held it in my palm for a minute. Not to ache, just to acknowledge weight. Then I put it back and closed the drawer the way you close a book you finished and might never reread. The house exhaled. I slept. If there's an ending worth writing down, it's this. I became simple again. A man who understands that respect is not a tip you leave after a messy meal. It is the price of admission. She decided she could pay later. I decided later had already come and gone.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.